It's time for Michael Popok and Dina Doll hot take duet. We're going to do a hot take, Dina, on something that you and I shouldn't even know about, let alone the ability to do a hot take on it. And the fact that we do know about it, another leak at the United States Supreme Court has happened. And why are leaks about what they're thinking, what they're drafting, what they're circulating, the lobbying among Supreme Court justices, and the horse wrangling about decisions? Why is it always about a woman's right to choose? Why is it always about reproductive rights? We never hear about leaks related to gun control. We never hear about leaks about property rights or about other. It's always about women. I think it is a subtle, again, second disrespect. It is salt in the wounds. They disrespect women and they can't keep a secret. And now, right with the backdrop, almost on the same day that President Biden and soon to be President Kamala Harris announced their support for what they're going to do over the next 6 months, which is the complete reformation of the Supreme Court, we see the reason why. This is a Supreme Court. You and I shouldn't know anything about what went on behind the scenes of the Idaho decision back in June about whether the federal EMTALA statute, the emergency medical statute that allows for an abortion in case of a mother's life or death, overrides the near total ban of abortion in Idaho. That we eventually got a decision that you and I and Ben and others, we kind of scratched our head. Like, it's an unsigned opinion that blocks the abortion ban and allows an EMTALA-based abortion to happen in Idaho, but nobody wants to take responsibility for it. But then there's all these concurrence opinions that are circulating about I would have voted for it or I wouldn't have voted for it. At the end of the day, women in Idaho in medical emergency situations, because of federal law and Biden-Harris administration, can get an abortion. But the fact that there's now a leak that it was not going to go that way. It was going to go 6-3 against the EMTALA and stopping any abortions in Idaho except for the horse wrangling that happened. Okay, that's what happened. Now tell us what happens next. Why do we know about this? And what do you think it means for the Roberts Court, their lack of discipline, and what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to do about it?
I mean, like you said, this is unprecedented. You know, the high court is usually like shrouded in mystery. We only were able to start hearing them remotely actually during the pandemic, right? You would have to be in the courtroom to hear the oral arguments. And now all of a sudden we have all these leaks, again, as you say, around the woman's right to choose. It's interesting because, you know, the first time around that this happened during Dobbs, they had this like investigation where they investigated themselves. And do you know the only people that weren't put under oath during that investigation were the 9 justices themselves, because they like to keep people above the law. So those 9 justices didn't have to testify under oath about this investigation. So it makes you wonder whether or not it probably is one of them. And then you have to ask in the question, who does it benefit, right? Who does this benefit? And we think during the Dobbs, the leak benefited the justices who wanted to change Roe v. Wade because it made it stick. We've talked about that before. And then in this case, we know that, as you said, it was 6-3 with the conservatives in their initial vote, wanting to really kind of shockingly say that Idaho doctors couldn't try to save a woman's organ by performing an abortion and still receive this federal emergency funds. Really disturbing position that it looked like the swing voters that we know on the court, Kavanaugh, Roberts, and Amy Coney Barrett, had a change of heart. And they realized, thankfully, that this was maybe too far a step, both legally and maybe for the country, and kind of changed their minds and essentially like punted this opinion, essentially like this is going to come up again in Idaho. But they punted it, which was at least better, right, than having this really draconian opinion come out of the court. But evidently, these leaks are going to keep coming, Popok. And that's the fascinating part yet. Evidently, I don't think it's a coincidence that this leak came out the day after Biden announced these reformations to the court that honestly the majority of the country is like really happy about, especially this enforceable ethics code. And then right then there's a leak and there's a promise of more leaks. And the justices that I think are hurt from this leak are the 3 swing justices who changed their mind. Do you now have Leonard Leo and the other Heritage Foundation people putting pressure on these 3 justices? Because now they know which ones made that law not happen. What kind of pressure are those 3 justices going to get, especially with this promise that there's more leaks to come? So there's somebody talking who's willing to go behind the scenes and gossip basically about their justices. And we are all going to be like front row spectators here and hearing as this unfolds. How is this going to affect these justices? And ultimately, because as you said, it's happening only around a woman's right to choose. How is this? I mean, women are already having a tough time in this country. I mean, the Texas law and the promises of J.D. Vance and Trump, this is like unbelievable, the assault on a woman's right of privacy of her own body. And now you have this person or multiple people in the Supreme Court who seem to be targeting specifically, women's right to choose and privacy rights by making it even harder with these leaks to have any sense of maybe negotiation that can kind of put a little bit of decency and common sense into these decisions.
Yeah, right. We saw it in what these leaks are demonstrating is an undisciplined United States Supreme Court led by an undisciplined Chief Justice. What normally happens in the ivory tower in the hermetically sealed world of Supreme Court justices is that there's a lot of horse trading going on back there. There's a lot of drafts of opinion circulation. What is initially circulated as a concurrence or as a dissent sometimes becomes the majority opinion as the justices lobby each other by way of written opinion, by way of caucus, by way of their clerks having coffee in the break room about how to get enough votes and how to count to 5, which is the number you need for majority, or if it's per curiam, differently. But that has been going on forever. What our reporting here is that CNN broke is what has not happened forever is that we know about it. There's been books written. The Brethren was written back when I went to law school, at least, which was an insider account of that horse trading, but decades after it happened, not in real time. And it's always, as I started this hot take, about a woman's right to choose. The Dobbs decision is a perfect example where the leaking of the information, I would say, backfired, unless the leaker was one that wanted to see a woman's right to choose ripped away from them, which I believe they did. Because it then unmasked, it was the Alito draft opinion that could have actually flipped and become some other type of compromise decision. As we know, Justice Roberts was working behind the scenes desperately to save as much of the Roe versus Wade decision as he could. But once it went public, it was over. It was like musical chairs, the music stopped and there was no chairs left. And so we had that going on. And so here we're learning about Idaho after Idaho in June and not before, which could have, if we learned about it before, if Dobbs is any blueprint, they would have ruled that EMTALA and the federal law that Biden and his administration was pushing did not override the state near total ban on abortion in Idaho. Thank God it didn't leak till now, but leaking is a problem. Now you've got Kamala Harris, right, Dina, who's out way in favor of what Joe Biden has proposed, President Biden has proposed in terms of total reformation of that branch of government. Why don't you walk us through what the proposal is, and we can take it step by step from the ethics code down to an amendment to the United States Constitution, but talk about the numbers game and how he would accomplish that, whether expanding the court even requires a constitutional amendment, since the number of Supreme Court justices is not in the Constitution. And how do you think this leak plays against that as a backdrop for what the Biden administration? Is it now more likely that he gets enough votes over the next 6 months to make this reformation because of leaks like this? Less likely, or is it neutral?
Okay, and one thing I want to just go back to really quick, because I think it's fascinating, is Chief Justice Roberts did not assign a draft opinion right after that initial vote, which was unusual. And you kind of wonder if he didn't do that because of the Dobbs leak. And, the other abortion opinion that was out this term was the abortion pill out of Texas. And that was clearly no standing. It was clear from the oral argument I was going to have to rule. So he didn't probably have to go through that same kind of process. But this one that was so controversial, he didn't assign a draft, which is very unusual. And that's maybe why it didn't leak. That was his way of maybe trying to prevent a leak. But hey, Chief Justice Roberts, you still got a problem. You may not have had a draft leak, but now they're drafting your private conversations. So you got to go track down this leaker. It's up to him. We'll see if he does or not. Maybe he'll put these 9 justices under oath. We'll see. Okay, so in terms of the Biden proposal, so basically he's proposing an 18-year term limit on the Supreme Court justices. Whether or not it applies to the current or future, that's not quite sure yet. But the hope with that is that it would be more predictable, right? You'd have each president be able to, let's say, here we go, like President Trump was able to appoint 3 people, Jimmy Carter, none, right? So it would be more predictable, the number of appointees you would have per president. And then there's this enforceable code of ethics, which just seems like a no-brainer. The federal judicial system has that. I'm a city commissioner. I have an enforceable code of ethics. I have to recuse myself if I have a financial stake or my husband has a financial stake. And I'm this lowly city commissioner. The fact that the Supreme Court doesn't have it is just beyond me. I think if you have more power, you should have more responsibility, not less. So that would be the easiest out of all of his proposals to pass. You would just need, the Congress and the House in order to pass something like that. The term limits would be much more difficult. There's whether or not you would need a constitutional amendment or not. I think voting this November for Kamala Harris is what would give us the ethics. Not only is she on board with it, but we need to win the House and the Senate to get the votes and be able to do this code. And then there's the constitutional amendment he proposed to basically say that no president should have immunity for a criminal, prosecution, basically to overturn that absolute immunity decision that just came out. Is the term limit and the constitutional amendment a stretch? Sure. But the fact is that the, conservative MAGA Republicans, or even predating MAGA Republicans, they've been trying to remake the court for 50 years. This is a long game. You have to know that what you do today may not happen tomorrow, but it is still worth starting the process. The Democrats and the liberals really weren't as focused on the court because the court was expanding rights rather than taking away rights. And now that we're in a completely different situation, we have to start focusing on the court. And that to me is what was so wonderful about the proposals was let's have a plan. Let's start the plan. Some of pieces of the plan, like the ethics enforceable code, could happen much faster. The constitutional amendment may not happen as fast, but that doesn't mean that maybe it won't happen in time to benefit like our kids, right? So that is kind of where they're at. I'm happy that the Democrats are being bold with their proposals. And also, to be quite honest, giving voters a chance to know where they stand. Most Americans are really upset about what's happening with the Supreme Court. I mean, Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, they're really, really rampant financial ethic violations as well as political stakes in cases that they didn't recuse themselves of, are making Americans really disenchanted with the court. And so this is a great first step to change that. And for voters to know, if you want to remake the court, this is the party to vote for in November.
I think your point that this is the perfect moment in time in history, this is to accomplish this. I can't think of a better one. Coming off of the Dobbs decision, ripping away a woman's right to choose that had been enshrined in the Constitution for 50 years, the leak around that, and their inability to solve the leak. and get to the bottom of the leak. And then another series of leaks now about another abortion issue, right? With all, as you said, with all of the ProPublica investigative reporting around Clarence Thomas. I mean, you can't keep waiting for the shoes to drop. The shoe.
Exactly.
This is a centipede. There's so many shoes dropping about Clarence Thomas. I'm getting ethical violation fatigue about him and about Sam Alito. So you have that going on, and then you've got this stark choice, as if we didn't have it before, between good and evil, between weird and not weird in November. And think about if the Democrats not only put Kamala Harris into a historic position as the first woman president in the United States. I can't believe I have to say those words in 2024, but yes, I do. If they put her in that position and they sweep with her coattails, and I think she has very long coattails, and they bring in this wave that's about to break of women and people who support women and reproductive rights and their rights to make them first-class citizens, not second-class citizens. And let me remind everybody, there are 8 million more women who are registered to vote than men. Women vote more than men as a percentage. And if that all breaks the Democrats' way and gives them the House and the Senate, then all of the things you and I are talking about on this hot take is no longer fantasy. It is reality. And it all has to do with getting to November and pulling that lever. I know people, not in our audience particularly, but in general, there seems to be this disconnect between the electoral vote, the power of the electorate, and what happens at the Supreme Court. It always used to be, well, they don't really affect my day-to-day life. The United States, they're not the gas pump. They're not the quart of milk. They're not my 401k. But they are fundamentally involved with your constitutional rights and freedoms, and whether you have rights and freedoms, and what our justice system looks like, and who's going to be who have to account, who have to be brought to justice within our justice system, and how long. It is important. So if there's nothing that motivates voters, again, not the MeidasTouch audience or the Legal AF audience, but motivates voters in general to get off the couch, early vote, absentee vote, mail in, whatever your state allows, wait in line all day vote, whatever it is. The Supreme Court alone and what it looks like and the shape it takes over the next 20, 30 years, 3 or 4 generations should be enough to get you to vote. And now we've outlined for you. People are wondering, well, what's Joe Biden going to do for the next 6 months? If he were as a swan song, can you imagine this, Dina? That with all that the Biden-Harris administration accomplished domestically and foreign during his 4 years, could you imagine if at the end he sets, just like John F. Kennedy established our space race and our space program, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are credited with the complete reformation and remediation of a branch of government. I mean, that I always said Lyndon Johnson's presidential museum, presidential library was the most fascinating one I've ever attended. It'll be Joe Biden's at the end of that, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I love like what you said about making that like the new space race, because I remember when Mitch McConnell didn't allow Obama to appoint Merrick Garland, there wasn't the kind of uproar that you would have seen if he, something with the House or the Congress, because a lot of people weren't as like connected to the Supreme Court, as you say. But now, as a lawyer, right, who follows the Supreme Court, I was so outraged. And there were a lot of Americans that were, but it's not like people were taking to the streets, right? Or even when they replaced Ruth Bader Ginsburg so close to the election. But I think as a party, and especially with him, Biden, refocusing it, I think we are now becoming more aware and more vested in how the Supreme Court affects so much of our life. And I loved analyzing the Supreme Court oral arguments in the spring, because I think a lot of people hear about the Supreme Court and they think, oh, this is going to be like out of my reach, right? These are the highest judges of the land, and they're going to be difficult maybe to understand, and they're not. And I love talking about it because I can think of no other actually legal things that impact our day-to-day so much, between the civil rights and criminal defendants. Like, there's so much that is impacted by the Supreme Court. I think we're waking up to it as a party, and I'm excited about that. And I think that momentum is going to create change. And so I'm here for it.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about it. We're going to do it on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF, talking about and following the United States Supreme Court as it begins its new term in October, first Monday in October, all the way through their vacations that happen in June and July. Because if you thought this term knocked socks off, wait till you see what happens next term. Even with Kamala Harris likely to win, we're not done. And there's a lot more work to do, especially around reformation. Love doing these duets with you, Dina.
Me too.
Let's do more. For MeidasTouch, for Legal AF, we got Dina Doll and Michael Popok. Shout out to the Meidas Mighty. Heary. Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know, and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.